All right, Alexander, let's answer the questions from the live stream we did with Larry Johnson. And we start off with Paulie, who says, watch yesterday's UK column. Mark Anderson at minute 14 shows Ukraine's transitions has been planned for years, as was the coup with Dutch involvement.
Right, okay, well, I mean, with Ukraine, of that there is absolutely no doubt. And I think that there's been, the various developments in Ukraine were indeed planned, going all the way back to the 1990s, as it now turns out.
Sparky says, make Ukraine Russia again.
Yeah.
Radovid says, let's remember Gonzalo Lira.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Ricardo Alfonso says, psychologically, the Ukrainians are totally win. W-I-N-N.
Oh,
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Atnosen says, brothers slaughtering each other, globalists grin.
Well, that lots of people in Russia say that, by the way.
Paul Walker says, but Ukraine states it's not started yet. When will the UK stop funneling weapons to this failed cause?
Well, that's a very good question. When will the UK? My understanding is that the UK is now out of weapons to send. The very last package that was announced at the Vilnius summit from the UK basically gave nothing. They gave a few, some more shells for the Challenger 2s, which have never gone into battle, and a few more vehicles, and that was it.
Megaloblastic says, diversity in training is our strength, bro.
Yeah.
New Guardian says, good day. Sparky says, during the Cold War, U.S. citizens didn't hate Russians. They wanted to save them from communism. Nowadays, hate is encouraged.
We discussed this on the program, and I agree with you.
Jay Galt says, someone asked DeSantis if he ever considered reading the British media as an alternative from the torture in Guantanamo Bay.
What to say?
Tim
I have
Gibson.
to read it every day, so there you go.
Tip Gibson, thank you for that super sticker. Carlos Gasper, thank you for that super sticker. NGS says, if the offensive fails, will the Western public know?
Well, that's a very good question. The answer is most of them won't be talked about very much. The people who matter will.
Yeah, Sparky says, Milley is a weakling. That's how he got there.
Yes.
Ricardo Alfonso says, perception management is really the only thing that they have. Here in Canada, people really believe Ukraine is winning. They don't care about facts.
Yeah, and that's a disaster if you think about it, because, of course, if people are all about narratives and no longer about facts, then, of course, the facts eventually break through and the narratives collapse. And that's a disaster for any country when it starts to cling to illusions instead of realities.
Oksana says, thank you for your truth-telling. I live in the U.S. for a long time, but it's really hard to be a Russian here nowadays. Wish you all the best.
Well, I understand it's quite difficult in Britain too, and we have, thank you for your support, and of course, we think very, very much of the kind of things you go through.
Sparky says, build a better world with bricks.
Yeah.
Yes. Tyler Durden says, superb discussions this week again. Thanks, gentlemen. Thank you for that. Rafiq Adams says, question, now that the ground has dried and the counteroffensive largely unsuccessful, will Russia finally launch its own offensive to end the war, or will they continue to grind down the Ukrainian army?
There is already offensives going on by the Russians, especially on the northern fronts, and apparently there's now growing worries in Washington, according to the latest piece by Seymour Hersh, that there will be a big Russian counteroffensive in the late summer, early autumn.
Otnosen says, is the industrious American spirit dead?
No, there are plenty of people in the US who still possess it. The problem is not with the people and with the spirit. It is with a very corrupt system that has developed in the United States, in Washington, and in other places of power. And that is what is holding America back now.
Justeros Panama says, if Putin was the fiend the West says, Nuland would have been poisoned the very day she was handing out cookies in Maidan.
So true.
True. Ricardo says, I can only imagine what the Ukraine reaction will look like when they finally open their eyes, like the Chechens.
Yes, I agree with that also, by the way.
Jack says, those that are familiar with the U.S. military officer corps know that anyone in Milley's position is a politician. He was appointed, not promoted.
I've heard the same from many people, that if you want to see where the real thinking in the military comes from, go to the colonels, not the generals.
Jeffrey, thank you for that super sticker. Jack says, after a certain height in ranks, officers are not selected by the DoD, but by Congress. Nowadays, these are yes men who operate politically, not militarily.
We come to that point, yeah.
Nikolai says, could this counteroffensive be pushed by the West to get rid of all the males that will turn on the West when they realize they've been duped?
Now, I don't think it's quite that calculated or that sinister, but there will be a lot of very angry people in Ukraine, and there'll be more than enough men left, I think, to make that, effective.
Garland Nixon says the U.S. actually builds an old VW Beetle and charges the government the price of a Lamborghini.
Yes, that's exactly what happens today within the military-industrial complex. I've been reading about this since the 70s, by the way, and it gets worse and worse every year. And always people talk about how it's going to be reformed, and it never is. And Garland, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us on these programs.
Paul Walker says footage of Russian medics tending to abandon Ukrainians 42 BDE is composed of ill medically unfit troops. In Latvia, footage of burning NATO equipment, also several Challengers reportedly destroyed.
I haven't heard anything about the Challengers, but I agree with all the other points.
Rafik Adams says, question, will Zelensky eventually strike a deal with Russia and China once Russia decisively takes East Ukraine and perhaps Kiev and Kharkiv?
I don't think he can. I think that if we get into that situation, then Ukraine will have to find another leader. I think that Zelensky is no longer an acceptable interlocutor for the Russians. And I don't think that on his own side he would be an acceptable interlocutor with the Russians. So I think at that point he would go. Whether there would be a deal at all is another matter.
Sparky says, what's up, Garland? You've been killing it on your live streams.
He has indeed.
Zahir, thank you for that super chat. Ricardo Alfonso says, Russia actually has an air defense academy, 5-year program.
Yeah, it's true. They take it very seriously.
Sparky also says most in the Pentagon nowadays got there via the F-up, move-up principle.
I've heard that too.
And just Stores Panama says there is no reason what U.S. weapons should escape the business model of programs obsolescence, fragile, so you need a new.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the point I think that's been made here is that you actually create weapons that have obsolescence built into them, so that you immediately then have demands to replace them. So that's a business model to keep the procurement process constantly going. You don't build a weapon that is like, say, the Kalashnikov, which just goes on and can be used year after year after year because it's perfectly designed for its role. And yes, absolutely, that is very much a truth about the way in which US military procurement now works.
Lada Moreau says Russia has talented engineers and scientists because in schools and universities, due to serious emphasis on math, chemistry, and physics education, unlike in the States.
That's absolutely correct. I would add, by the way, that if you're talking about production of shells, hot topic nowadays, I mean, even assembly line workers in factories that make shells need some knowledge of chemistry. I know, I've spoken to one.
Garland Nixon says Russia builds lots of shovels and washing machines.
Absolutely. It's the world's greatest producer of both.
Yov Bressler, thank you for that super chat. Sparky says Newland, Blinken, and Sullivan are psychopaths who replace the usual sociopaths who usually run U.S. foreign policy. They're OCD against Russia.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I take the point.
Rafik Adams says, comment, the U.S. was financially gutted by big banks and oligarchs in Weimar pre-collapse stage. How we don't wind up with American Führer, recall Aesop's fable, killing the goose that laid the golden egg.
I think that the United States still has enough democratic antibodies within its system to prevent a Führer-type figure emerging. I think we should be very careful. I think we discussed this on the program. I think we should be very, very careful before we make too many comparisons between the United States of today and Weimar Germany in the 1920s. They're radically different societies, and Germany in the 1920s was a much more militaristic society than the United States is or has ever been at any time in its history.
Mobius Zero says, can China survive a war against the U.S. on sites like Quora? For example, people there think all you need to beat China is block the Straits of Malacca and create an anti-China coalition.
No, I mean, these ideas are wrong. And if people really believe that on Quora, then they're deluding themselves. And China is a colossus in terms of its economic resources. And it's now got powerful allies at its back. That's why it's been so busy building connections with Russia, with Iran, with all of these places, so that it's protected in the event that there is the kind of sea blockade that people are talking about.
Mr. Fish says intelligence is expressing difficulties simply.
True.
Sparky says young people in the U.S. can't even hammer a nail. Fred B. Kevin says, thank you, gentlemen. Amir, thank you for that super sticker. Mobius Zero says, to add to my first point, would it really be that easy to bring down China, block the straits, gather all who have a problem with China, Japan, India, etc.?
Well, it wouldn't be that easy. And first of all, I mean, you're talking about gathering together all those people who have something against China. Well, first of all, I doubt very much that India would want to be a party to such a thing. They may have their own issues with China, but they would not, I think, welcome a sea blockade and a potential war with China, for which they're not ready. And China also has many friends. It's got many more friends than it has enemies in the world. And, of course, if you start imposing sea blockades, they might disastrously backfire on you. It is we who use Chinese products. It's we who use Chinese subcomponents in all of our equipment, including our military equipment. China has complete supply chains, and it has sorted out it's working to sort out its raw material dependencies with deals with countries like Russia and Iran.
Rafik Adams says, question, post-80, U.S. turned from industrial power to financial empire. Big banks captured elites, socially engineered America into service, fire economy.
Yes, it's true.
Mine Messeral, thank you for that super chat. Mr. Fish says, I'm not alone. Thank you for expressing reason and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Mobius Zero says, last and big question, why on God's green, beautiful earth does the collective West and Japan think China is weaker than Uganda and Iraq combined?
Well, it's a very good question, given that China's manufacturing industry is bigger than that of the West and Japan combined. So I know it's a good question. I mean, many people I find simply don't face up to that reality. And as we've discovered in war, manufacturing is the key.
Tabernak says America, G7 can play an extremely productive and positive role within the multipolar frame. Sometimes you've got to take a step back to move forward.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right about that. And I have been saying this for years.
Whackbeach says, thanks, guys. Please shout out for Gonzalo.
Yeah, we do.
We do. Elena Diaz says, Westerners have forgotten the turbulence in Kazakhstan 2022. I find our lack of history memory generalized and unsettling. How did the West manage to make us forget what happened yesterday as if history has no importance?
Well, that is their tremendous skill, because the way they do it, basically, is through a constant flow of news, which is never given context. So people are always asked to look at the present, never at what happened in the past.
Ricardo says, to go to war with Russia, NATO would have to have been staging equipment and men for the last year or so, and the Russians would be attacking those targets. Boots on the ground won't be as easy as they make it out to be.
I agree.
Gordovan says, President Biden is not a wartime president.
No.
Controlled Demolition says, when I lived in Hiroshima, I saw student athletes from China, North Korea, from all over the region making origami cranes and leaving them in the Peace Park.
How moving.
Rafik Adams says, question, Alex, how hopeful are you that Putin and or China can independently negotiate peace with Ukraine if neocons continue to escalate despite decisive losses? Example, Iran, Saudi, Yemen.
Well, we're not optimistic. We're hopeful. I mean, the neocons are still a tremendous power in the United States, and they have most of the media on side. And, of course, institutions of the American government, like the State Department, parts of the CIA, and the rest. So, absolutely, they're a real danger. And we still have to have hope, because without hope, what is there? But we're realistic as well.
Biden forced an end. ADEC says Biden forced an end to the rail strike in the U.S., preventing workers from getting sick leave. Are we paying for sick leave for Ukrainian civil service and rail drivers?
Yes.
Would be galling.
Yes.
Yes, you are. Yep. Elza says, if Biden misses some steps one day and can't go up again, will he still hold telephone calls like Zelensky and the war continues as before? Because the deep state runs it. No change.
I think if there is a situation where Biden becomes physically infirm in the way that you describe, then I think the pressure on him to step aside will grow. But, I mean, it has to be a visible thing.
Just Stars Panama says, have you seen the Wall Street Journal leak of China base in Cuba?
Yes, I've seen all about this. I don't even see this as a story. I mean, first of all, the Chinese deny that there is a base there, but let's assume there is. What of it? How many bases around the world does the United States have?
Tony Yin, thank you for that super sticker. Ricardo Alfonso says Putin went after the oligarch class, the one unforgivable sin, and he wasn't selected by the West.
Agreed. Agree on both counts.
Valies, true. Valies says, love you guys. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Valies. Vinicius Arcado says, thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you.
Ricardo Alfonso says, never underestimate Joe's ability to F things up.
Yeah, true.
Take a pick. 1313 says, getting along with Russia and China is so obviously the best thing for America and the West and the world. What is crazy is that we let the military-industrial complex and the greedy globalists to tell us otherwise.
I agree completely. You're totally right about this.
Alexander Sisolas, thank you for that super sticker. Death Dealer 1341 says, when do you think Ukraine will get the F-16s?
It looks increasingly as if it'll be next year now.
Tim Gibson says, I remember Obama getting jealous of Putin's fame around 2011. That could be when the worm turned.
Well, hostility to Putin existed long before Obama appeared on the scene. But certainly Obama didn't like Putin at all. It was very, very obvious from the way the two interacted. Putin wanted to work with him, was keen to do so, but the two men just didn't get on in any way. And that, again, is a pattern. People didn't like Obama and they don't like Biden today. And it's not just Putin. It's leaders around the world. Even the British don't like Biden, and they didn't like Obama very much either, as it now turns out.
Chris says, greetings from Cyprus. Our get-together in liberated Odessa next summer is still on, meeting under the statue of Catherine the Great, Free
Yes.
Gonzalo.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris. Martin says, the New York Times is reporting that the skipper and Gilligan have both decided to transition. No word on Marianne. Thank you for that. Thomas Bergman says, will Russia reopen the northern front to capture Kharkiv after Wagner is refreshed?
Who knows? I don't know. They don't share their plans with me.
Let's see here. Where are we? Jim H says, Washington, London, Brussels, the axis of weasel.
Mm-hmm.
For that. No Buddy says, truth speaking, peacemakers like these three are 10 million times more valuable to humanity than all the corrupt Western politicians and the government officials. Thanks for that.
Okay.
And Joe Ganscher says, what about all these spectacular oil deals Russia, China, Iran, and even Iraq have been inking? Seems Russia has sewn up the Eastern Hemisphere's oil.
Well, yeah, I mean, not just Russia. But clearly, oil deals are now being done, and they're being done outside the Western system. And that is something that US leaders ought to be worried about. And surprisingly few of them are, apparently. I mean, they don't seem to be really thinking about this. You would expect that this would be the dominant issue, but it's not one that they ever talk about.
All right, and those are all the questions from the live stream with Larry Johnson. Thank you, everybody.